Hey folks, we are back again and it's time for another Quent-ervention. Now, I'd much prefer to be doing quintessentials. I'd love to be talking about things that are happy, that make me really excited. I'd rather be having a conversation with somebody. I'd rather be having a quinvocation and telling you about the jobs that I do. But today we are going to have another Quent-ervention, and that Quent-ervention is with somebody who really does need one. That somebody is Quentin Tarantino. And today we're talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, it's his 9th film, and since 1992, that's nearly 30 years. 9 films in 30 years isn't actually that many films, says me, the man who's sitting on his couch not having made a single film in that time. However, it is, for a big Hollywood director, not a huge number of films. And the most recent couple have been, relatively successful. I quite enjoyed Django Unchained. I also quite liked Inglourious Basterds. I didn't watch Hateful Eight, and that is on my list of things to do one day when I can't be bothered doing anything else. But today we are talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And we're also going to be talking about something else, which is Quentin Tarantino's future. So before I go any further, I want you to know that this is going to be very spoilerific. We are going to be talking about things that happen in the film, and which being the case, if you haven't seen it, I'd really suggest go and watch it, make your own mind up, and then we can come back and you can hear what I've got to say about it. I'm not going to be holding back. And so if you want to be completely unspoiled, toddle off now. Okay, to those of you who are still here, let's talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is the story of 3 people working in Hollywood in the 60s. We've got an actor and his stuntmen who are 2 best friends, Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, and then Margot Robbie, who plays Sharon Tate. Now, anyone who knows history will know that Sharon Tate is an interesting character whose future may not be as bright as perhaps you think it is. And that's one of the reasons that I find this film really strange and, honestly, not great. Okay, putting it out there right now, I really didn't like the film. I thought it was incredibly long. I thought it was really slow, tedious, self-indulgent. There are so many shots that are repeated, and we get it. Okay, Quentin, we understand. You have a language of film that you love, and you're going to keep coming back to it. That's cool, but you need an editor, and you need somebody who's going to tell you, no, sorry buddy, that's too long. That shot isn't doing anything. Those 15 minutes of somebody driving and tires screeching as they weave through people, boring. We get it. We know where that character's at. If you're trying to say something more about the character, maybe do it through dialogue, not 3 songs and then 15 minutes of driving. There is a fascination with cars and the American 60s car culture. There's this thing about neon and Hollywood in the 60s, and there is a fascination with history that is great if you care about that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure the person who cares about it the most is Quentin Tarantino, and he expects that we're all going to care about it just as much as he does. And I hate to tell you this, but we don't. Well, I don't. It's interesting for a little while, but then it just wallows. And it wallows in its own self-interest. The characters are wallowing in their own self-interest. And there are moments where I'm like, why have you made that decision? There are legitimately moments where he's cutting in the middle of a scene. There's dialogue, and he's cutting in between words, and you're like, well, why are you cutting Timothy Olyphant, but at the same time, you've let Brad Pitt drive for 5 minutes longer than we needed to? And you've got this character of Sharon Tate, Margot Robbie. So, and this is one of the other things I find quite weird, that it's this mix of real people and 2 fake characters who never existed. And you've got Sharon Tate and Charles Manson, who's in there for about a minute, and all of these other people, sort of Hollywood luminaries, some of whom are not that luminous, let's be honest. And then you've got these other 2 characters who there's an entire fictional history built around, a TV series that never existed, and they do guest spots on other TV shows that did exist, and they interact with real people. So, there's a moment where Bruce Lee appears and isn't treated particularly kindly. There's this strange intersection of reality and unreality, and I feel like it's the Tarantino verse just poking into our reality, and that's more interesting if you know what happened and there is some kind of dramatic irony. But here, by the end of the film, you think you know what's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen. And what does happen is this violent, horrible, hateful sequence where characters that you've kind of built up as being vaguely likable suddenly just turn into awful, awful human beings. And you can perhaps blame that on the fact that they're taking drugs, or maybe the fact that they are just broken humans, and you've seen through the entire film that perhaps they are broken humans. And Brad Pitt's character is certainly no angel at all. I mean, it's said that he killed his wife, and he's not a healthy human being. But at the same time, you get to the end of that film and you've developed a rapport with him, which is then thrown out the window when he just commits crime, like acts of horrific violence. And it's violence that Tarantino seems to take a lot of joy in showing, like really enjoys the process of showing how vicious and how over the top and how disgusting these characters are. It's unnecessary, and it's saying a lot more about the filmmaker than it is about anything else. The performances are really spectacular in some cases. There are moments that you're watching people slip between character on screen and character in the film itself, and it's seamless and it's beautiful. DiCaprio, love him or hate him, he is a very, very interesting actor, and they've got charisma to burn. The three leads are Pitt, DiCaprio, and Margot Robbie should make for an incredible film, but Margot Robbie is left off to one side doing God only knows what. Honestly, she's an afterthought, and I think that says a lot about the way that Tarantino thinks about people, women specifically, that they are an addendum, they are an afterthought, they are a thing that is to be discussed and is to be fought over or is to be protected, but they're not actually really going to drive a story. And I know people will be saying, Kill Bill. Yes, absolutely. That's a story that I felt like he was trying to tell for his friend, that being Uma Thurman. I don't think in this that Margot Robbie is given anywhere near enough to do, and I'm really questioning why she is given the billing that she is. And I dislike the fact that the film is actually trying to set her up as being something more than she is. That it's trying to say this is about the Sharon Tate murders and it's about the Charlie Manson story, and it's not. It's not about that at all. It's something else entirely, and it's a fiction, and it's a fantasy, and it's a Tarantino fantasy of revenge and violence and seeming hate against people. Now, other people have said that it's actually a lot more multi-layered than that, and maybe that this is a film about the inability of America to come to terms with its own violence, and it's about conservatives and liberals and Democrats and Republicans and their inability to understand each other and move and grow. And if that is what the film is about, I applaud Tarantino for trying to say it, but I think that he got so caught up in his love of the 60s and filmmaking and that kind of oeuvre that maybe he forgot that he had a point to make, because I certainly didn't get it. The thing I really wanted to talk about today, though, is actually looking forwards a bit. And the reason I feel like a Quent-ervention is absolutely necessary is because Tarantino has been tapped as potentially directing the next Star Trek film. And that scares the hell out of me. I think it's a terrible concept. He is a filmmaker who is very interesting, and love him or hate him, he has a following, he has a style, and he has a singular vision, and that's perfectly fine for a Tarantino film. But the point of Star Trek, and something that I think it's really important to never forget about Star Trek, is that it's about looking forwards. Star Trek is about either a utopian view of the future or a hopeful view of where we could be in the future. It's looking forward and looking outwards. It looks out to the universe. It looks forward to the future. It looks up and it says we can be better. This is the best that we could possibly be if we all work together and we can explore the stars, and we may run into problems, but we will work and be our best and we'll overcome those problems, or we will learn from them. Star Trek is about learning and growing and accepting, and it is super, super progressive, and it's one of the reasons I really love that show and those films. Tarantino is a filmmaker who's about looking backwards. His entire catalogue is about looking backwards. It's about a version, even in Pulp Fiction, it's a version of the 90s that isn't the actual 90s. It's this weird 60s inflected version of the 90s. And then Jackie Brown, which is about the 70s. And then Inglourious Basterds, which is about a war that didn't really happen that way. It's about looking backwards and seeing things that happened and trying to see them through a Tarantino-inflected lens. And once again, that's what Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does. It looks backwards to a time that he was in love with and then tries to fix it through his own Tarantino lens and turn it into something that he finds more appealing. And then by the end of it, he's turned it into something grotesque and violent and disgusting and muddled and confused, and it's a mess. What we don't need is a backwards looking person trying to make Star Trek into some kind of a retro wannabe violent throwback. There is Star Trek from the 60s and it is what it is, but it was always about looking forwards, even in the 60s. If you try and look back and replicate that now, you're doing the antithesis of what Star Trek is actually meant to be about. If people are excited about the idea of Tarantino doing Star Trek, have another think about it. Why do you like Tarantino's films? Do you like them because they are violent, because they're funny, because they are cool? How's he going to be if you can't smoke on the bridge of the Enterprise? Because everybody smokes in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. What do you like about them? What is it that excites you about them? And then think about what is it about Star Trek that you love or that means something to you. And do they cross over? Is there a Venn diagram where there is crossover between what Tarantino does and what he says and what he's about and what Star Trek is about? Because I really don't think there is. And I'm hoping that cooler heads prevail, that somebody says, actually, you know what? Maybe, Quentin, you can make another science fiction film that isn't Star Trek. Like, there are properties out there that are all about, retro sci-fi. I think he could do an amazing Flash Gordon. I think he'd be great at doing like a Fallout style film. Something that is retro and at the same time science fiction. But Star Trek isn't about that. And if you focus on the retro aspect of Star Trek, you get something completely different. You get Star Trek Continues, which is great, but it's replicating something that happened a long time ago and doesn't understand the point of looking forwards. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys again. I know that I've been ragging on things a lot lately, and I'd much prefer to be talking about positive things. So hopefully in the future we're going to be talking about things that are really exciting, that I'm really happy to talk about. But today we had to have a Quent-ervention, or a Quent-ervention. If you like this kind of thing, subscribe, comment, please comment. I really would love to know if you really liked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Tell me. If you think that he's the perfect director for Star Trek, tell me. Do that in the comments down here. But subscribe and do all those wonderful things, or don't. You know what? You do what you want. I'm not your mum. I'm not your dad. I'm not related to you unless you are my mum or my dad or my brother. And hi. Okay. Bye.